Hi, I'm Carl Vaders, and for over 40 years, I've been in small church ministry. But for the first 25 of those 40 years, I did not know I was a small church pastor. You see, I thought I was a big church pastor that just hadn't gotten there yet. And I know from talking to thousands of other small church pastors over the last few years, a whole lot of you feel exactly the same way. So let's talk about that. This is a segment that I call the three undeniable realities of pastoral ministry from my larger talk called Redefining Success in Ministry. So, what are the three undeniable realities of pastoral ministry and how did I come to them? Well, after 25 years of trying to become a big church pastor and the church not cooperating, at least that's what I thought, I really went through a downward spiral for a while, wondering what's wrong with me, or what's wrong with the church, or what's wrong with the principles of church growth that they're teaching me. And it turns out there wasn't necessarily anything wrong with any of those things, but there was something else going on that I just wasn't being told about. And that was, well, what I've now called the three undeniable realities of pastoral ministry. So let's take a look at them one at a time, shall we? Reality number one is this: 80 to 90% of churches will never be larger than 250 people. Really? How do we know that? Well, because the best predictor of future events is past events, and for 2,000 years and counting, as Jesus has been relentlessly building his church, 80 to 90% of church bodies have never been larger than 250 people. In fact, the advent of the megachurch is a very, very recent phenomenon. So if that's the way it's been going, it's likely to continue to go. And yet the church continues to survive and thrive, mostly due to the multiplication of smaller congregations, not primarily due to the building of larger ones. There's nothing wrong with larger churches. I'm grateful for my big church friends, but 80 to 90% of churches will never be larger than 250 people, which means if you are pastoring a church of under 250, which is like 95% of us, you're not broken. You're what we call normal, and there's no need to fix normal. That's reality number one. Reality number two is this: virtually all pastors will pastor a small church for at least some time in our ministry. How do we know that? Well, because that's where 95% of the churches are. They're small churches. So even if you do pastor a church that becomes big, you're likely to pastor a small church for at least some time in our ministry. In fact, I'm going to tell you this: you're likely to pastor a small congregation for most of your ministry, and a whole lot of us are going to pastor small churches for our entire time in ministry. But I don't know if anybody's telling our young pastoral trainees that. Most of them, like me, come into it thinking we're going to go to a bigger church, maybe because you were raised in a bigger church and so you think that's a normal sized church and you aren't aware of the statistics. Or maybe you're just simply so excited about reaching the world for Jesus, you're convinced that that means bigger is going to happen. And here's the thing: you can be just as excited about reaching the world and your community for Jesus in a small church as in a big church. But here's the deal: if virtually all of us are going to pastor a small church for at least some time in our ministry, and most of us for a big chunk and maybe all of our ministry, if we're all going to do it, shouldn't we figure out how to do it well? This, I believe, has been one of the biggest gaps in our pastoral leadership over the last generation or so. We're helping pastors, or we're telling pastors the principles for getting bigger, but we're not helping them to pastor at the size they are right now. It seems backwards to push people to break through the 200 barrier when 90% of us never will break through the 200 barrier, and not teach us how to pastor well under the 200 barrier. We're all going to do it, so let's figure out how to do it well. Which leads then to reality number three: you can lead a small church well without settling for less. Whenever anybody has any pushback against the ministry of helping small churches thrive, this is always where the pushback comes from. I don't get a lot of pushback, but this is where it's on. Every once in a while, I'll hear from someone who's at church leadership, or maybe one of my big church friends, and they'll say, okay, Carl, it's great that you like and that you're resourcing the small churches, but our church isn't going to stay small because we want to reach our community for Jesus. To which I always respond with, so you think your small church friends don't want to reach the community for Jesus, and that's why they're small? At which point they always backpedal, because that's not what they meant. But when you keep hearing the idea that somehow reaching the community means inevitably that you will get bigger, then you begin to reverse that principle to think, well, then if I'm not getting bigger, there must be something wrong. But here's the good news, especially for those of you who, like me, are small church pastors. You can pastor a small church well without settling for less. God knows how big your church is. He put you there on purpose. It's small for now. It may be small for a long time. It may be small on its way to getting big. I don't know where that's going to land. But right now, at the size you are right now, you can do right now what Jesus is calling your church to do right now. You don't have to wait to get bigger to do it well. You don't need to have a bigger budget to do it well. You don't need to have a bigger facility or fill your big facility that's empty right now. You don't need to do any of those things immediately in order to do what Jesus is calling you to do right now. You can pastor a small church well without settling for less. So you know what? Let's go do it. For more information about this or other full-length sessions that I can bring to your conference, to your webinar, or to a multi-day workshop, go to karlvaters.com/speaking. When you get there, you'll see other short teaching videos like this, along with a way to contact me to come and speak at your conference.